So hi everyone, I'm Sophia. Stella mentioned I am an AI solution designer. I started off at IBM where I used various Watson tools to build out conversational solutions for clients, and I'm now at Pypestream doing similar work. I've been at it for about 2.5 years, and my background is in linguistics, so I'm excited to share some of what I've learned along the way. Any luck with the slides?
They're coming up.
That's all I got for an intro about myself. So.
Yeah, maybe you can say a few words what kinds of applications you're currently doing with those tools.
Yeah, so a lot of the use cases tend to fall along the lines of helping out to automate customer service, helping out with if people want to check on their orders for a more retail type client, or if people want to file a claim, or there's a lot of insurance, those kinds of things. That.
And how could it be used personally?
How could it be used personally? I think it's a way, something that at Pypestream we like to do. Oh, thanks, Sal. Something that at Pypestream that a lot of times as new hires we do is people will build intro bots. So that's sort of almost like this concept of a digital alter ego, where it's kind of just a tool to interact with and learn information about yourself in a way that's maybe more interesting than reading a resume or something like that. So I think that's where, when you move away from kind of a very businessy use case and move into more about what the possibilities could be personally or as a way of interfacing with someone, I think that's where it gets interesting. But it looks like my slides are finally up, so great. Okay, so before I started talking about more of the kind of technical building blocks or main components of conversational AI, I first wanted to just level set on what it is, what it's not within the field of AI. I think since AI is such a hot topic and it's in all these headlines, there's some kind of it's good to spend some time to kind of divide out what the different kinds are. So conversational AI specifically refers to virtual speech-based assistants, which you might know colloquially as chatbots, that communicate or that automate communication at scale. And the way they do so is with a combination of natural language understanding and simple rules-based approaches. They can be either text or voice enabled. You have probably interacted with both varieties, where it's either you're typing in a chat online or you're on the phone with conversational AI. It can be a combination. There are solutions where you're on the phone, but then like a link gets texted to you and you continue the interaction via text. So there's a lot of different ways you can interact with it. And it can serve different purposes depending on the goal or the use case that you're trying to accomplish. So it can automate transactions, and in some of those insurance use cases, for instance, where there's kind of a series of transactions that a lot of different people need to do. It can guide people through the steps to do that. It can be educational, kind of, hey, here's how to navigate this website, and here's FAQs on this topic, and let me point you in the right direction. And it can even be communicative and social, all depending on how it fits into your overall goal or what you're building. But in my experience, the best use cases are those which involve interactions or transactions that happen a lot. They're predictable and they go down a finite number of paths, because that allows us to kind of build out almost a decision tree of like, here's all the ways this could go down, and for each of these ways, here's the conversation that should happen, here's the information that should be shared and whatnot, rather than kind of a conversational AI where you could get really any kind of human input, in which case it's hard to respond appropriately if your scope is really, really wide. And at the bottom I kind of just have some logos that you might recognize as far as players in the field. So Siri is a big one, Alexa is a big one, there's IBM Watson, there's Nuance, there's Pypestream, and there's a lot of kind of both really established larger tech organizations as well as interesting startups doing work in this field. Next slide. Okay. I also wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the as is, where conversational AI is as a field or as an offering at large. I should say that these statistics maybe should, given the general economic slowdown happening, I'm not sure these predictions might be a bit optimistic, but it's where we're yet to see kind of the overall role that AI and conversational AI can and should take within this time. So it's definitely an interesting landscape. But in general, it seems like interest is really strong, both amongst businesses and consumers. AI is certainly trendy And a lot of companies are interested in exploring how they can incorporate it into their processes, how it can change the world for better. But the technology itself still has a ways to go. I mean, we've come a long way, and there's certainly a lot of really incredible things that AI can do. But we have, our sights are high, and there's still work left to kind of build this out into what we really want it to be. And actual implementation, as far as clients and businesses incorporating it into their processes, is lagging a bit behind interest, simply because it can be hard to know where best to fit AI. People are interested in it, but it's like, where do I need this? Where can this fit within? That wouldn't require us to re-engineer a lot of processes that we already have. And also kind of a requirement to build out robust artificial intelligence is a lot of data that's clean, things that are well documented. You need data for a certain period of time, and that isn't always available all the time. But nonetheless, Outgrow predicted that by 2020, by the end of this year, 80% of businesses would have some form of chatbot automation. Currently, or I think at the end of 2019, less than 50% of companies actually had incorporated that. As far as how users feel about it, it's kind of half and half. Some users would prefer to communicate with a live agent just to get their answers right away and not have to deal with the chatbot. Others, don't want to wait on the phone for a long time, and they prefer an immediate answer when shopping online. So it's roughly half and half that way. And Caravan reported that about 70% of millennials report positive experiences on the whole, but less than half actually think they provide better service than a human agent. And currently we see chatbots most frequently built out in the healthcare, telecom, and banking industries. That seems to be where there's those industries kind of are really trying to work that in. So before I go into the actual concepts, are there any questions? I should have mentioned at the beginning, but feel free to interrupt me at any point or put questions in the chat. I will.
Sophia,
yes.
Anna Taves here. It
Sure.
seems that this crisis we're living through is only going to accelerate the development of chatbots. Just think if this was already in place, if all of those unemployment claims were coming in. But what happened, because the system was not set up for the volume, unprecedented volume of unemployment claims, and we are where we are. People can't get through, and I think it seems to be happening everywhere. And what a great opportunity for this technology to kick in and really provide a much better experience for people who are going through a lot of stressful days in their lives.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that's a big sentiment right now within the community, and I think a lot of businesses are seeing why this could be really helpful in this time. And right now, it's just a question of at right this moment, companies cannot necessarily prioritize these projects. They're too busy, fighting to the next day. But I'm hoping that when things calm down a little bit and we're back on our feet a little bit as a society, then we can, and when we start the work of, how are we going to rebuild stronger? How are we going to fix all the problems that this exposed? The question of where AI could fit into that landscape is going to become a really relevant one.
But just one last thing, not to distract.
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity for, like you say, the community, the conversational AI community, to step up rather than wait for businesses to come to you? And when things settle down, we don't know when that is going to happen, and people need help now. Is there an opportunity to be more proactive about it?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think what's lacking is data. You need access to a lot of training data. And that's really what would be the roadblock, I think, to just getting something up and running.
But we can see later one of the examples of that application kind of being nimble, and the crisis management chatbot that Francesco built and deployed and integrates with the World Health Organization data, and gives you very quickly a percentage risk for you to be impacted or experience death as a result of the corona infection. So it's basic example of how you can do something literally in a weekend to build it out and give some basic information to people. And obviously, for the more advanced features and functionality, you do need to spend more quality time with the data and build that knowledge base.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, and then I guess the question becomes how to distribute it, how to spread it throughout communities and let people know that, you know, this resource exists. But yeah, that's certainly something I think we're all trying to think about, like how this technology can be of use in this time. But cool. Okay, so now I'm just going to go into some of the key concepts that define the construction of a chatbot, essentially. So chatbot training tends to break down into intents, entities, dialogue, and context. So I'll start at intents. Intents roughly map to actions that users want to perform or use cases that you want your solution to be capable of handling. So I have an example here about kind of how you might want to think about training something like a chatbot that helps users enroll in health benefits through their employer or something like that. So an example intent for this use case might be enroll benefits. So that's one kind of discrete thing that users are coming to the chatbot trying to do. And the way these intents are trained is you essentially gather about 40, there isn't like a magic number, but generally the more training data you have, the better. I like to gather about 40 example user utterances, which are just various ways that users can express that intent that they have. So for our enroll benefits intent, it might be, you know, I wanted to enroll in benefits. Where do I go to sign up for healthcare? How do I get dental coverage? I need help signing up for benefits. And the goal here is to kind of cast as wide of a net as you can to come up with as wide a variety as possible of potential ways people could express this, because you know there's a lot of different ways to talk about things in general, and especially when you get into solutions that are, you know, across several regions or like across even different countries, there's different vocabulary that gets used, and you want to make sure that that's captured. And a quick note about notation here. The notation of a hashtag and an @ here and $signs in the context section, that's notation that gets used at IBM. That's where I picked it up. It's not across the entire industry, but I find it useful as a way to distinguish at a glance whether you're talking about an intent or an entity. So I've used it throughout this presentation. But yeah, that's intents. Then entities, we can define as nouns or keywords that help to narrow down a user's goals. So within an intent, you might have, you know, within the overall goal of enrolling in benefits, you might have certain keywords that users use that help you to narrow down specifically what they're trying to do. So I have this example of coverage type. So you might have, and coverage type is an entity type. So the general schema is you have types of entities which contain multiple, or at least one, but it can be multiple, and those in turn have synonyms. So if we have an entity type, which is we're calling coverage type, you might have 3 entities within that category: health, dental, and vision. And then each of those might have synonyms. So different ways people might be getting at talking about dental benefits, whether that's dentist, dental care, dental provider, orthodontist, like root canal, like it can be, you know, anything that you think should map back to that specific goal that they have. So going back to our example, like if people said, I want to enroll in benefits, I want to enroll dental benefits, I want to enroll in vision benefits, those all map back to the same intent. But that additional keyword helps you determine specifically what kind of action they're trying to do within that overall category. And then dialogue is the actual responses.
Hi, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask a question here.
Go for it.
So, as in when you were talking about intents, you said that you try to deal with the various kinds of ways that a question can be asked, especially because it's a globalized world today. Mm-hmm. So, but not everybody would have a good grammar, right? I mean, in the Western world and English-speaking countries, people might write inexact grammar. But if you go to Eastern side, it may not be so good. So, how do you deal with that?
The great thing about the models that typically are used, that are trained for chatbots, is they don't pay attention to grammar as such. Like they're not trying to make sure that your sentence is grammatical in the sense of like a school teacher telling you that's not a grammatical sentence. So it's really, you have enough training data, and it really gets a sense of what the keywords are, of what the general combinations of words are. That, so, you know, you could say enroll benefits and you would arrive at the same intent, even though that's not, you know, a fully fledged grammatical sentence. So grammar shouldn't be a problem at all. And even spelling generally isn't a problem as long as it's close enough. There's a kind of a technology that is used called fuzzy matching, which is like, if the word that a user puts in isn't a real word, but it's a certain number of, like, it has a certain similarity with a word that is real that we know about, then we're going to say that's correct. So if someone typed in dental and got 2 letters wrong, you know, we might still say like, oh, that looks close enough to dental that we're going to assume this person wanted to say dental. So in that way, we can account for, you know, a wide variety of grammatical and spelling differences in human input.
So can you define what amount of fuzziness you want, or is it something preset?
Fuzzy matching is really just a general strategy more than it is like a specific tool that gets used. So different company, I mean, you can just kind of implement it yourself, in which case you can define it however way you want it to be defined. Different or conversational AI platforms, I imagine, have different ways of going about it, whether that's like a hard-coded platform level thing where you can't manipulate it, or whether you can manipulate it in each solution. There's generally best practices around, like, you don't want, like, the number of letters of difference that you're going to accept should be kind of proportional to the length of the word. So if you're saying like you can have up to 2 letters off, it wouldn't really make sense if someone, you know, typed in a 3-letter word and it's like, we would be saying like cat and bot are the same word where they're clearly not. So there's like a set of best practices around it. But, so I don't mean to get into the weeds about fuzzy matching, but yeah, suffice it to say that there's a level of customizability as far as how much you're gonna, what range of spelling variation you're gonna accept, I guess, in your bot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yes, so I was talking about Dialog, which refers to the actual responses that are provided to users by the chatbot that you see on the front end as you're talking to it, the message bubbles essentially. And Dialog, typically, they tend to be, well, there's multiple ways of doing it. So they can be conditionals, where you're saying like, hey, if you recognize this intent and this entity in the same utterance, then say this thing. So for instance, if our bot recognizes enroll benefits intent and the vision coverage type in the same sentence, we can deduct that the user of the chatbot is interested in enrolling in vision benefits. So we can say, hey, if you recognize these 2 things, say this. Say, it sounds like you'd like to enroll in vision benefits, I'd be happy to help. And this is kind of the NLU approach to Dialog. You can also just have it be based on a series of rules, like, you know, maybe after this message, it sounds like you'd like to enroll in vision benefits, the next message gives them a link, and that's just a rule you're setting on the back end. That link isn't triggered by NLU necessarily. It's just after we say this next. So there's places where there's examples where you want to do it based on NLU, and there's examples where it's better to just have like a logic that you implement on the back end, like, this is where we're going to go next, regardless of what the person said.
Sophia, you mentioned the NLU, natural language understanding.
Yes.
Would you like to explain a little bit more what that is?
Yes. Yeah, NLU stands for natural language understanding. It's sort of just a catch-all acronym that I use to refer to this sort of like AI responding based on what people are actually saying approach. So yeah, I don't know, is that enough? Sorry. Okay, and then lastly, there's context variables. So this category to me kind of encompasses any information that you store and use later, or kind of any logic that's happening as far as communicating with backend systems or manipulating variables. You can use it just for personalization, for instance. So if you ask someone up front, what's your name? They tell it to you, then you can save that and then bring it up later on down the flow. If I say my name is Sophia, then later on, if the chatbot asks me to provide some other information, the response can be, thanks for providing that, Sophia. Next, I need your phone number. And that kind of just adds a nice personal touch. It can be a bit more complex when you get into integrating with different systems. As Stella mentioned, like Spotify or any kind of business internal systems, all that communication that happens between the chatbot and the system and all that information that goes back and forth, I kind of put that in the context/variables category in this approach. So yeah, so those are the sort of basic building blocks that are involved in building out conversational AI. This is a little bit about the workflow, I think, or kind of how I like to go about actually designing a conversation flow out of those building blocks. So typically it helps to visualize it and get it down as a tree, essentially, where you are plotting out all the different directions that your conversation could take you in depending on user input. So here at the top, I have kind of 4 intents or 4 basic use cases that this chatbot is going to handle. So users might have questions about benefits. They might want to enroll benefits. They might want to check on their claim, or they might want to appeal a claim. This is just a couple of examples, and these are intents that we would have trained on. So let's say that users or that our solution recognizes a certain intent. Then what happens? Then is it always going to be the same response? Is the response going to differ based on additional entities that were recognized in the utterance? Do we need to ask additional questions to get more information from the user to determine which direction to send them down? So this all gets captured in here, and it's a good way to sort of map out all the different possibilities and have them in your head. Typically, I wouldn't have all of the upper level use cases like this on the same tree, just because it can get a little overwhelming when you have all your message bubbles and everything in there. So I like to split them out to kind of keep it clean. But yeah, so I typically have the chatbot responses in these blue boxes. And then if you go over to the right side, we can start thinking about kind of, if we need to ask the user information, what kind of information we're going to store, like what we need to keep from them and where that information needs to be used later down the line. So for instance, maybe I need the user's name, and then I also need their date of birth. So I store this information as name and date of birth. And then using that, I can potentially send it over to the account management system to pull up their account and say like, hey, I've pulled up your information. It looks like your benefits enrollment is X, Y, and Z. So that way we can have, we don't have to ask them every single time. We can just use this information down the line wherever we might need it. And, oh, sorry, can you go back? Sorry about that. Yeah, so I like to use, well, Visio is a good tool to do this in. Draw.io is a good free tool to do this in. So typically it's good to have this documentation particularly if you're working with multiple people, or you have, a group of stakeholders or something that you need to show this to and say, here's my proposed design for my solution. It kind of keeps it clean and easy to read. For me, if I'm building something that I'm the only one who needs to look at, I just like to do it on paper, because I think it's easier to just get your ideas out that way. But it really comes down to how, what your personal preferences are as far as mapping out these diagrams.
So I want to make sure we have enough time for Francesco's portion as well. So if there's a way to speed up through the rest, that'll be great.
Yes. Sorry about that. This is just a little bit about the workflow, which the main idea is that it's iterative. So you develop your training data. It's great to use real training data if you have it, but if not, you can sort of make it up just as a POC. You build it out, you deploy, you test it. You're like, hey, are we getting the right response for this utterance? Are people going down the right tree? Are our integrations working right? If no, you fix it, deploy it again. So it just goes on and on and on, and it keeps going through. The idea is really just to keep versioning it out as additional people get in there and test it out. Okay. And lastly, I just had a couple of best practices, both for development and user experience. As far as development, it's good to consider, the main thing is really considering the happy paths and the unhappy paths. So, when you're building it, you know how it's supposed to work if it works, but you also want to make sure that if it doesn't work, user experiences are still kind of graceful, and they're not frustrating. So kind of allowing users, or allowing your bot to fail gracefully. You know, how many times are you going to retry to get someone's name before you say like, hey, this isn't working, would you like to speak with a live representative? How many times are you going to try to understand the user's intent until you know, you're upfront about that. So I think that's important, and because failure is going to happen. Your chatbot can't accommodate every single use case that people might come to it with. So that's an important one. Testing with different groups is really important, because if you're doing it all by yourself, you might miss things. A big one for me that is maybe counterintuitive actually is that not everything has to be AI or NLU. Like I had a solution in the past where we were trying to use NLU for people saying yes. And sometimes it's easier just to have a button, because, you know, we were hearing it wrong and we weren't routing it directly. It might be easier just have a button where people click yes. So kind of trying to think where can we really benefit from using NLU to address this, or where is it better just to like give people a menu. And then on the user experience side, I think it's important to be honest that you're not, you know, your chatbot is not a human being. Don't try to fool people into thinking it is. Like, hey, you know, I'm Spotify's virtual assistant. How can I help you? That kind of thing it's generally better to be transparent about it. Keep responses short and succinct. It's good to direct the user, you know, rather than just saying, how can I help you? Saying, I can do these 3 things. Which of these would you like help with? Just so they have an idea of what they can ask you about and what they can't. And then lastly, considering the personality of your virtual agent and how that feeds into the goal you're trying to accomplish. You know, is it more professional? Is it more friendly? Is it playful? That all plays a role in kind of the development you're going to go through.